The following will be the homework for Target 5. Remember, we did do that complete the square activity in class, so always draw your shapes if that's going to help you understand it better. Number 1, our first step always is to move the constant to the other side, so I'm going to add 17 to both sides. So k squared plus 10k plus something to complete that square is going to equal 17. To complete that square, we have to take that middle term that we divide by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then we had to create a square, so we have to do 5 squared, which is 25. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides in order to keep that equation balanced. Now I can rewrite it as my big square or my binomial squared. So I'm going to have my parentheses squared in order to get the area of it, because we're doing base times height or length times width. My variable, which is k. My middle term divided by 2, which was 5. That gives me the length of one of those sides. Equals, on the right-hand side, we have 25 plus 17. So our total area now is 42. We've completed the square or righted the equation for the area of the square. To solve for k, I'm going to take the square root of both sides using my square root method. So I have k plus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 42. We cannot simplify the square root of 42. If I break it down, I could break it down into 7 and 6. Nothing's going to give me anything that I can pull out because we don't have any perfect squares. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. They're not like terms, so k equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 42. Let's look at number 2. So again, start by moving the constant over to the other side. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So x squared plus 8x plus something is going to equal 1. Take our middle term, which is 8, divide it by 2, I get 4, and then I have to do 4 squared to get 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Rewrite this as our binomial squared, so our parentheses squared. My variable this time is x. That middle term divided by 2 was a positive 4, and that's going to equal 17. Take the square root of both sides. I have x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 17. 17, again, I cannot simplify, so I'm going to leave it just like that. Subtracting 4 from both sides in order to solve and get x by itself. 4 is not a like term with the square root of 17, so I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 17. Remember, if you have questions on how these steps are going, please go back to the Target 5 notes. If you need help solving using the square root method, go back to the Target 2 notes. Number 3, I'm going to subtract 27 from both sides. V squared plus 2v plus something equals negative 27. Take my middle term and divide it by 2, I get 1. 1 squared equals 1, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Complete our square, v plus 1 squared. V, because it's our variable, 1, it's our middle term divided by 2, equals negative 26. Use the square root method. Don't forget the plus and minus. So v plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 26. We cannot have the negative underneath the square root, so I'm going to pull it out with the I, the square root of 26. 26 can also not be simplified, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. They aren't like terms, so v equals negative 1 plus or minus I, square root of 26. Number 4, start by moving that constant over again. So I'll subtract 83 from both sides. V squared minus 18v plus something equals negative 83. I'll take my middle term, which here is negative 18. So negative 18 divided by 2 gives me negative 9. And I'll square negative 9 to get a positive 81. Again, remember, if you are doing that in your calculator, you need to put that negative 9 in parentheses and the squared on the outside. Rewrite completing the square. V, our middle term divided by 2, so V minus 9 squared equals negative 83 plus 81 is negative 2. Take the square root of both sides. I have V minus 9 equals plus or minus. Take the negative out with an I. Square root of 2 stays underneath because we can't simplify that. Add 9 to both sides, and V equals 9 plus or minus I square root of 2. Number 5, again, first thing, always move that constant over. So I'll add 56 to both sides. X squared plus 10x plus something equals 56. Take my middle term and divide it by 2. I get 5. Square that value, we get 25. So we're going to add 25 to both sides of our equation. Now we need to rewrite it as our binomial squared. So I'll have parentheses my variable, middle term divided by 2 squared equals 56 plus 25 is 81. Now we've completed the square, so we can use our square root method to solve. Taking the square root of both sides, we have x plus 5 equals plus or minus. The square root of 81 is 9, so we can simplify that down all the way. So I'll subtract 5 to get x alone. Remember, we need to think of this as a positive 9 minus 5 and a negative 9 minus 5. So x equals positive 9 minus 5 is 4. Negative 9 minus 5 is a negative 14. Last but not least, on number 6, we'll again start by moving that constant over. So we'll add 88 to both sides. So x squared plus 18x plus something equals 88. Take that middle term and divide it by 2, we get 9. 9 squared is 81. So we're going to add 81 to both sides of our equation. Rewrite completing the square, so parentheses my variable. My middle term divided by 2, so plus 9 squared equals 88 plus 81, which is 169. Take the square root of both sides. I get x plus 9 equals plus or minus 13. 169 is a perfect square. Subtract 9 from both sides, so remember we need to do a positive 13 minus 9 and a negative 13 minus 9. So x equals 4 and x equals negative 22. Please come in if you have questions. Again, please feel free to always draw your squares and your rectangles in order to better figure this out.